I recently joined in an experiment with the online homebrewers club Brewtubers, and if you're not familiar with them, I'll leave a link for the website down below so you can go check it out. The experiment was that we would all brew the same West Coast IPA, same ingredients and everything. The only differential in the experiment would be the yeast. Wanted to find out what do different yeasts impart to the beer, what characteristics do they bring out, what do they subdue, and kind of find out what's our favorite yeast for a West Coast style IPA, and then ultimately share that information with you, the viewers, so you guys can make an informed decision on what type of yeast you want to use in your IPA. There were 13 of us in the experiment, and as you can imagine, 13 of us shipping 12 beers, because we only shipped 12 beers. We kept, one for ourselves. 12 beers being shipped down to Florida, where Gary is at, is pretty expensive. It was about $25 for me both ways. I paid for both ways. So there was a comment from somebody the other day, what a great trick to get a bunch of beer, but actually it did cost quite a bit of money. So we do have some sponsors to help out with the experiment, and they weren't able to provide a lot of monetary support, but they did provide us with some yeast, one of which I used in a future batch, and also some hops, which I used in this batch. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the adjustment of the recipe, as well as how I brewed the beer for this, what the process was, and because of our sponsors, roll that sponsor intro. I wanted to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the Brewtubers 2020 Yeast Experiment, Imperial Yeast for their top-tier half stainless steel mash paddle sponsorship, and Hopsteiner, deep in the heart of Yakima Valley, producing quality hops for over 6 generations. Visit their website at hopsteiner.com. So to adjust the recipe, we're going to need to jump into Beersmith so I can show you what I did for my particular situation and give you some tips and pointers on what you can do if you're just starting out in all grain and you want to know how to adjust those recipes that you see in BYO magazine or something you see online. You need to adjust them to your equipment and your ingredients. So let's jump into Beersmith and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so we hopped over into Beersmith. I've got my recipe named here. I don't usually have a default profile in my equipment just because I use so many different things all the time. So I'm going to drop this down and select the Anvil 10.5 because that's the brewing system that I used. Let's take a look real quick at the Brewtubers recipe, the yeast experiment recipe. It is yeast experiment IPA, American IPA is the style. And then you can tell that it was created on a system that is a Herm system. And so they've got some different boil sizes and all that type of thing. A lot of times if you find a recipe out there and you can download it, you can do that. I prefer much more to just enter all of the ingredients myself manually. That way I can make sure that, there's not something in the recipe that's going to throw me off on my brew day. So you can see we got all the ingredients here. We got all the hops and everything. The one thing that is missing from there is, of course, the yeast, because that's part of the experiment. But the other thing that's missing is the salt additions. And what Gary had said on his introduction video was that it was 4 grams of gypsum and 5 grams of calcium chloride that would go into 10 gallons. So we'll have to take a look at that. I did contact them and ask them for a parts per million measurement, which is a little bit more accurate for me, or a little bit easier for me to do, because then I can put in the amounts into my software and come up with that parts per million in the recipe. So I've got the Anvil 10.5 foundry there. I'm going to go ahead and select, it's not 100% vital, but just so we see the style guidelines, I'm going to go ahead and select the beer style, American IPA. Then let's go over to the mash profile, and we'll select the single infusion, medium body, no sparge, I believe is what they have on there. Let's double check the recipe and make sure. It looks, yeah, okay, single infusion, medium body, no mash out. So we'll go ahead and select that as the profile. Single infusion, medium body, no mash out. So we've got that. And then we'll go back to our design. And I'm going to go ahead and enter all of the ingredients in, and then I'll be right back once I get all that done. There's no sense in you watching me do that. So I'll get all that stuff entered in, and then as soon as I'm done with that, then I'll come back and we'll discuss how to adjust the recipe for your system and your ingredients, because the ingredients on a recipe may not match the exact ingredients that you have, so we'll talk about that as well. All right, so I got all my ingredients in there, and it's matching up pretty good with the recipe that they developed. 1067 for the original gravity, 61.3 for the bitterness. Color is 7.7, and ABV is 6.6. Let's take a look at what theirs is, 1066. 6.5, 64.7 IBU, and 7.5 for SRM. So to me, that is very, very close. Now, here lies the issue that I wanted to address. My Centennial, my Citra, and my Simcoe may have different properties. So let's take a look. So my Centennial has 8.5% alpha acid. The one that's specified in the recipe has 11%. So we need to take a look at how many IBUs that is imparting to the beer, which is 16.6. And then we need to go in and change that to 8.5. And then we'll have to increase it in order to maintain the same bitterness. So it was 16.6. So we'll need to, I'm going to go with 0.75 just to see where that takes us to. And that's over. So you might have to mess around a little bit to get the exact measurement. 16.7 is pretty close. We could do maybe 0.64. And that's below. So I would rather err on the side of caution and go 0.65 ounces. And that'll bring us up to the correct amount. So then we got 20.8 on here. So let's go ahead and change the 8.5, change that to 8.5, and then let's try 0.95. So we're pretty close there. So let's jump back in and put 1 ounce. And that's not quite enough because we're still a little bit short, 23.1 IBUs. So let's put 1.2 ounces. That's a little bit high. So like I said, you have to fiddle around with this a little bit to get as close as you possibly can. So 23.6 and 23.1, we could maybe drop a little bit, but I think 1.1 is going to be pretty close there. As far as the Citra goes, that is measured, what I have is at 13%. So that'll actually, we need to drop that a little bit. So we're going to put that at 13%. And then that's going to put us over the top of where we need to be at there. Even though it is a Whirlpool hop, it does impart bitterness. So that should be 24.1. We're at 25.9. So if we want to, we can drop it down probably to like 1.95. And that'll get us pretty close, 24.1. Let's take a look and adjust it a little bit more. And 23.9. So let's 1.86. All right, so yep, 24.1, 24.1. So 1.86 ounces of Citra will get us the IBUs theoretically that we need for that. And then the Simcoe dry hopping does not impart any bitterness, so we're good on that. Okay, so let's take a look at the water. So according to the recipe guidelines, we were supposed to be using distilled or RO water. So we'll open up the water tab and select distilled water. And he said that it was 4 grams of calcium or gypsum, 4 grams of gypsum and 5 grams of calcium chloride. So let's add some salts and we'll go calcium chloride. And if it was a 10 gallons, let's go 2.5 on our calcium chloride. And we'll see where that puts us at. And add 2 of the gypsum. 2 grams. This almost half. The sulfate's at 60 and the chloride's at 60. So let's drop the gypsum down just a little bit. We'll say 1.75. And that's going to put us at 60.7. Now the calcium chloride will adjust that a little bit as well. So let's put 2.25 in there. And that's got us down to 67.4. So let's drop it a little bit more. 64.4. We're getting close. So we'll drop it down to 2 even, and that puts us right at 60 parts per million on the chloride, 60 parts per million on the sulfate. So as you can see, we had to adjust that down, but it's just a matter of playing with it a little bit and putting some figures in there and getting your recipe dialed in. So according to this, we're all good. All right, and brewing salts are not just for the mash water, so I actually added them to the sparge as well. And we'll go back and take one quick last look at our recipe. Got the water, got the mash salts, got the sparge salts in there. Everything looks good. I just would need to add the yeast to it, depending on what type of yeast I'm using. Everything still looks in line as far as the gravities go. So we'll jump back to my brew day. So for my brew, I use the Anvil Foundry brewing system and measured out all my grains, all of my salts. And when I mashed in, I actually used a profile that I hadn't used before for the mash, and I wound up with a little bit of a thick mash, as you can see here. So I went ahead and used some of my sparge water to loosen that up a little bit. Mashed that for 60 minutes. Once I drained and sparged that, then it was time to add the first of the hop additions. kept on going with the boil, added the next hop addition, and then we had some hop additions right at flame out. Once I was done with that, then it was time to chill it down to, for my particular case, I used Voskevike yeast, and I wanted to ferment at about 80 degrees. So I chilled it down to about 80 degrees, transferred it into my fermenter, and then put a heating pad inside of the Delta Brewing System's firm tank and put an Inkbird controller on it to manage the heat. Fermented it for several days. It was about 3 days. And then on the 4th day, raised it up to about 90 degrees. And then at that point, we were supposed to cold crash. And this is a new technique that's by Scott Janisch. If you have not seen it, he has a book out called The New IPA. So one of the techniques on this beer was based around something that he wrote about in his book, which was cold crash dry hopping. So basically what we did was we cold crashed the beer down to as cold as we could. In my case, it was about 33, 34 degrees. And then we were dry hopping with a 2-ounce charge of Simcoe. And then after that, we waited 24 hours and then kegged the beer up. Once I was done kegging the beer, then it was time to bottle it. Thank goodness I still have some of my old bottling equipment from back when I bottled beer, Bottle Tree and the Vintner sanitizer. So I got all the bottles sanitized and got everything ready to go. Then I used the tap cooler counter pressure bottle filler for filling all the bottles. I did fill a few more bottles than what I needed, and thank goodness, because I actually, when I was packaging the beers for shipment, I dropped one and it broke on the floor, so I was able to get enough beers, just enough beers out to everyone. I shipped 12 beers, crossing my fingers, hopefully none of them would break upon delivery, which they didn't. And then that left me 1 beer with which to conduct the experiments that are going to be coming up. So be on the lookout for the tastings. We're going to taste all of these beers that everyone brewed with all the different yeast, kind of give our thoughts, and then we're also going to upload all of our information into the Brewtubers website, where you can actually go take a look at the different graph of what our impressions and what our perceptions were of what the different yeasts did to the beer. And I know it's subjective, but you know, hopefully all of our data will kind of align with one another. And across 12 pallets of beer drinkers, I think we'll probably come up with some pretty good data based on, you know, what our perceptions are of the beer. Certainly appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. This has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.